Okay, Chevra. So yesterday we did all of Sif Yud Gimel, if I'm not mistaken, and we just didn't do the little piece in the Imrei Yaakov. And basically what this halacha had stated is that if there is a standard boilerplate text that sort of closes some of the loopholes of being able to claim asmachta later, you can only put that sort of text in if you know that the party that's committing himself to it is aware that such boilerplate text exists. And you also, I guess they also would need to disclose that any language that is not actually accurate, but that is sort of going to, like, say that it was done in front of a based in chashuv, that if the person makes a kinyan, so then they can use that boilerplate text. If they don't make a kinyan, he has to explicitly say it in order for the witnesses to be able to do it. So he says, and also any other added text that protects the rights of the shtar holder. He says, Rak shehi lifnei halva shalmanas kein hu malvelo, has to be inserted before the loan takes place. You can't, after the fact, draw up a document that gives added rights to the lender that the borrower was never aware of. Okay, so that's where we were up to yesterday. Rak shehi lifnei halva, aval la'acher ha'halva lo mishtabed ela al yedei kinyan. But he says after the loan was made, you have to do a new kinyan in order for the lova to commit himself to added terms. B'das hashach dedafke b'nei emanus kebei trade sarch kinyan acher halva, aval b'nei emanus stam ein sarch kinyan. Oh, okay. So we did actually do this yesterday. So we're up to now Yud Daled. We're up to Yud Daled. V'chol shtar sheyesh bo kinyan, bein shtar chov, bein shtar mechira o matana. Okay, getting back to contract law. Any shtar that has a kinyan, that in other words, that was enacted through a kinyan between, let's say, the lender and the borrower, whether it's a promissory note, whether it's a transactional note that records a sale, a bill of sale, or whether it's a bill of gift. Okay, im eno nichtav biyom hakinyan, kosvin bo hazman miyom hakinyan velo miyom haksiva, shekosvin miyom haksiva. You record the date not from the day that it was written, but from the day that the transaction took place. And that should seem fairly obvious, right? Okay, shekosvin kinyanu mi ploni biyom ploni, or kaninu mi ploni biyom ploni, that you write, I have purchased on such and such, from so and so on such and such a date. V'kasavnu v'chasamnu umasarnu liyad ploni. And we, the witnesses, have written this contract, signed it, and given it to such and such a person who is the holder of the bill of sale. V'im einan zochrim yom hakinyan kosvin yom hasiva, the hakinyan kosvim stam. And he says, now let's say there was no bill of sale written up at the time of the transaction, and they don't remember the date, right? The buyer then goes over to the witnesses and says, can you record that I bought this fair and, I bought this outright? And they say, well, that was like 2 months ago. Do you remember the date? And he says, well, I know it was on a Tuesday, but I don't remember whether it was the second Tuesday in November or the third Tuesday in November. I just don't remember. Actually, I think there were 5 Tuesdays in November this year. It wasn't an election. Yeah, okay, so he doesn't remember, right? So he says in that kind of situation, so then they should record the date that the shtar was written on such and such a date, and they don't write a date at all for the date of the transaction. So they would say, kaninu mi ploni, v'kasavnu v'chasamnu biyom ploni umasarnu liploni, that there was a transaction from such and such a person, and we, the witnesses, have recorded this and signed it on such and such a date and have given it to so and so. When we call makom, Im zochrim shekanu mimenu b'tchilas chodesh ploni o b'sofa o be'emso. So, but let's say they remember that it was either at the beginning of the month or the end of the month, but they don't remember the exact date, okay, or the middle of the month. So yichtavu kaninu b'shlish harishon shel chodesh ploni o be'emtziiso o b'shlisha acharon. What they can do is they can write the transaction was made on the first third of the month, or the latter third of the month, the last third of the month, or the middle third of the month. Vim einam zochrim eza chodesh haya, o she'einan zochrim im hayat chilas chodesh o imso o sofo. And let's say they don't remember what month it was, or they don't remember what part of the month it was. Because so then how should they write? Because yom haksiva, and they are going to record the date that the contract is, or the bill is written. Yichtavu bishtar shtar zeh icharnuhu v'kasvenuhu. Then what at least they should write is, when they don't remember the date at all, they should write that we delayed the writing of this bill of sale, and we're writing it now. So at least there's a record to record that the transaction that the bill of sale represents was done at a time that was a while ago, and that's the reason why the date is not being recorded, because we don't remember. Okay.
Why they wouldn't write it? In other words, we said, remember it's the latter half of the first month, they should write that.
That's right.
And in the previous example, should they write, they know it's a Tuesday, it could be the second day, whatever they agree on.
Yeah, but that's the point. In this case, they don't remember the month, and they don't remember whether it was the beginning or end of the month.
The first example we gave.
Yeah.
They think it's either the second or third Tuesday of the month. Should they not write that?
Oh, well, that's what I inserted in my language.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, whatever they remember.
Yeah, it would seem that whatever they remember, they should write. It was on a Tuesday in November, somewhere in the middle of the month. That's what they should record. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Sheyesh bo kinyan kosvim bo hazman. So they should record the date when the transaction was made. Dekevin dekonu miyodo shalova bifnei hamalva bekinyan suder. He says, because since the witnesses were party to the transaction, meaning that usually what you do is, I think we studied this before, the witnesses give over the handkerchief to the seller, and the seller lifts it up, and in doing so, he transfers sale over, or possession of the item, over to the buyer, okay? So therefore, since they were party to that transaction, gamim over zman rav me'az, then even if a large span of time has transpired since then, mikol makom reshayin lichtov shtar me'oso zman, the govabo mishubadim. It is therefore, they still should write the shtar whenever they should record whenever it took place. Why? Because knowing the date of a transaction is very important. What's the nafkamina of knowing the date of a transaction? Let's say there is there's a loan, okay? And let's say on this loan, the lender lends $1,000 to the borrower. Let's say the loan was made on November 1st. On November 15th, the borrower liquidated all of his real estate assets. So now, when it's time to come back to the borrower and get the money back, the guy says, I'm sorry, I have nothing. I'm not liquid. I have no cash to pay you back with. Well, fine. I'll have to foreclose on one of your real estate holdings. Well, I have no more real estate. Excuse me, at the time when the loan was made, you had plenty of real estate. Let's go. So he says, but how can you do that? Right? So he says, oh, I have the date. On this date, on such and such date, on November 1st, you still owned your house. So I can foreclose on the house and go to the buyer and foreclose on the buyer. So that's the reason why having a date recorded in the shtar is so important. It probably would be relevant in a bill of sale as well. In a bill of sale, let's say a buyer buys a piece of merchandise and then it turns out to be faulty. comes back to the seller. Seller says, I'm sorry, I'm not liquid. I got nothing. Oh, wait a minute, you got real estate. You still owe me the thousands of dollars that I paid for this merchandise, and it turned out to be flawed merchandise. Okay. Anyway, the mishas hakinyan kvar motziim ha'edim hakol. He says basically what the edim are doing by recording the date in a shtar is indicating to everyone that this was, in other words, they're creating. When a kinyan is made, right? Remember we said that real estate, when anytime a person purchases real estate, they always do it like a title search. They always try to find out about the holder of the real estate, whether he's made any transactions previously that would encumber the real estate. So as soon as the kinyan is made with witnesses, that encumbers the real estate, and it creates sort of it's more of a public thing that allows the buyer to track this down and figure out whether he should buy the real estate or not. Yes, same concept. Well, the problem when we write a ksuva, even if we write it before shkia, but the chuppah is taking place after shkia, we write the date really not after shkia, it would be after tzeis hakochavim. We specifically avoid doing a chuppah during bein hashmashas, that period between shkia and tzeis hakochavim, between sunset and nightfall, because of the question of what date it is. See, a ksuva is a promissory note. That's really all it is. And so you want to make sure that it's not predated. Like if you predate a promissory note, then that's not fair to future buyers from that debtor, because they don't know that you're not allowed to halachically predate a shtar. By predating a shtar, you're creating a false lien on a property that didn't exist until later. Okay, and that's going to swindle any buyer that bought property on a date before the transaction took place, if the shtar was predated. So that's the reason why you have to make sure that the ksuv is dated correctly. Yeah, you have to change the date. Have I had to change the date? No, but I've had close calls where, the party planner or this, people show up late, and well, sometimes you may have to just rewrite the ksuva, and that's why you always want a Masader Kedushin always wants to have a backup ksuva, and because that's only one thing that could go wrong with the ksuva. There's plenty of things that could go wrong with the ksuva. What commonly happens is that you try your best to get the names correct, and all of a sudden at the chuppah, the father says, "Oh, we name, our daughter's name is not just Rachel; it's Rachel Sprinza," and nobody. Yeah, we don't mention that because she doesn't like Sprinza. Yeah. Right. So then you got to write it all over again. There was a case in the shul where the Masader Kiddushin was not a well-versed person in doing Kiddushin, and he left out the word betula throughout the ksuva. What a tremendous embarrassment it was. Not all ksuvas, not all boilerplate ksuvas have the word betula. Some ksuvas are boilerplate, but they leave that blank for you to fill in because sometimes it could be a second marriage, right? So, yeah, there is, and that's the part that has a space in it, and it has a space for betula. Because sometimes you would call a woman who's a divorcee would be called a matrachta. And a woman who's a virgin is called a betula, and a woman who has questionable status would be called itita. or a widow would be called an armalta. So there's all different words that you have to fill in, right? So you have to know what those words are. And so a lot of times when you have to rewrite ksuva, and there are a lot of times when the Mesader Kiddushin looks very, very frum, and you place your confidence in them, and then it turns out that they have no idea what they're doing, right? So this happens. It just happens, right?
Well, that point there is it up to the rabbi to determine the woman's previous status, especially if they're both true or women, about where she holds, about that because she might have relationships.
Yes, it's a very good question.
That question.
I understand. Any woman who's getting married for the first time, we call her a betula. We call her a virgin. Now, the reason why is because it is understood that what's the point of putting what her morphological status is in the ksuva? What's the reason? Morphological, right? Yeah, yeah. It's the correct word, though, isn't it? It's a clean one. Yeah. So Joby can explain it. Yeah. So the reason we do that is because, according to the Gemara, a basula is entitled to 200 zuz, and a non-basula is only entitled to 100 zuz. So the understanding is that in today's conventional society, today's modern society, a man who is marrying a woman for the first time doesn't care whether she's a basula or not per se, but rather is more concerned that this is her first time getting married. And therefore, he's willing to pay the extra 100 zuz, even if she's not a basula. Yeah.
And it's like how a woman get married via a star or
Kesef shtar.
So that's really what our concern should be, not so much what's really on the document. If fulfill that, then she's married, right?
Yes, but the rabbis created an enactment that a man and a woman cannot live as husband and wife unless she has a ksuva. It's a rabbinic enactment. So yes, they're legally married, but they can't live as husband and wife unless she has her ksuva. And by the way, this is relevant not just for a couple getting married for the first time. If a woman loses her ksuva, she cannot live with her husband, and she has to, they have to write a new ksuva. You need both. Yeah, a ksuva without kiddushin doesn't make them married. Ksuva is not a marriage document. It's a promissory note entitling her to financial rights. The Gemara says that anyone who marries through bia is I forget the language of the Gemara, but is doing something crass, and it's not permitted. Shtar was eliminated sometime several centuries ago. So really, the only method that we use today is kesef. And that's the presentation of the ring. Okay. So v'hareze ki'ilu tafus shtar biyadu mishas hakinyan kidleil sif yud ulakamen sif yud zayin ayin sham. So therefore, once the kinyan was made, it is as if the creditor or the buyer, whatever the situation is already holding a shtar to enable him to have a lien on the property of the debtor. V'chein noagim, and this is the correct minhag. That's what the Shach says. Okay, where are we holding? All right, good. So let's go on to the next piece. What did we say? So yichtavu b'shtar shtar ze icharnuhu. So if they don't remember the date at all, so then the proper text that they should write is, we have delayed writing this shtar, was done a while ago, and we wrote it on such and such a date. So he says, biur ha'inyan. He says, to clarify this matter, he says, that post-dated promissory notes are still kosher. Shaharei hura kocho shel bal hashtar sheinu torif ela mizman hashtar. And the reason is because the reason why they're kosher is because the holder of the note is working at a disadvantage, not at an unfair advantage. You see, the reason why you can't predate a promissory note is because you're potentially swindling any purchasers from that seller that come after the false date on the star. But to post date a promissory note, you're only disadvantaging the holder of the note. So let's say technically he had a lien from November of 2022, and you don't write the star until January of 2023. If that's the only date that's on the star, then his lien is only effective from January. It's not effective from November. But at least no innocent bystanders are going to be harmed in the process. It's only a disadvantage to the holder of the note. And even if it's not written explicitly that this was post-dated, it's still kosher. Aval im lo kasav da'akna pesulim. Ela im kein mefurish v'kasav bo v'icharnuhu. But that's only true when it says the word da'akna, which I think means that there was a transaction made. So he writes in the footnote, he says, Pirish shahalova, just make sure I'm reading, yeah. Perish shahalova kosav bishtar lahedja shemishabed nechasav lamalva gam osam nechasim sheyikna achar hahalva. He says what that term the ekna means is that the person who is indebting himself through that note, let's say it's a promissory note on a loan. What the borrower is essentially stating when he says de ekne, that any property that I purchase in the future shall be encumbered through this promissory note, he's essentially saying any future property that I purchase will be encumbered by this note. So you see, let me just clarify. A post-dated star could have one potential problem. What's that one potential problem? Let's say the loan was made in November 2022. And then, so all of the borrower's holdings, all of his real estate is encumbered by that loan. Except for what? What if the borrower purchases a piece of real estate after he borrowed the money in December of 2022? He purchases property, okay? Does that property become encumbered? Well, technically not, because at the time that the loan was made, he didn't own it. So therefore, if you were to post-date the star and put it as January, then you're falsely encumbering a property that shouldn't be encumbered. So how do you resolve that? You resolve that by saying that when a lender has a right to demand of the borrower, I want you to include in the star, the promissory note, that you are encumbering all of your holdings, not only the things that you currently own, but the things that you will own in the future. So that anything that you acquire from this day forward shall also be encumbered by this loan, okay? So he has a right, and that's what the word de'ekna means, that anything that I own or anything that I will own in the future shall be encumbered, the debtor says, shall be encumbered by this loan. And that's what you record in the star. He says, why? I mean, isn't that, but that's standard practice when you owe the money. So, if you default on a loan, the lender has a right to seize your assets, right? And basically all that you're doing when you indebt yourself in that way is you're saying you're entitled to be compensated by anything that I own or anything that I will own in the future. Yeah, it's a protection for a lender. Is it what?
Everything's covered for them. And they've got it all covered.
That's right. That's right. When you think about it, No bank is going to lend you money unless they can secure the loan with your current holdings.
Which is usually one thing, but the house.
That's more than enough.
Right, right.
It's not everything
More
you
than
own.
But it's still not gonna exceed how much you owe, right? So what they're getting is more than what they need. But if it's everything, it still can't be more than you owe.
There are ways to designate a specific property in halacha also. You can do that halachically as well. But a lender has a right to say, I want to designate all of your property as being encumbered based on this loan. So that, right? So why? Because if you end up selling house A, right, and you end up selling it, then I have a right to go to property that you haven't sold in order to be able to get my money back. Why should I have to run after a buyer? That's right. That's right.
One company doesn't try to lend money from the bank.
Yeah.
One building, go after my other buildings.
Correct. Correct. But that's a protective mechanism. But that doesn't, remember, we learned that whether limited liability corporations are even legally valid according to halacha, right? It's a big question mark still. We haven't really researched it properly yet. Okay. So that's what the word de'ekne, he says, when the debtor says in the shtar, all future property that I acquire is also encumbered by this debt. So then you don't have to write that this shtar was written, was post-dated. Aval imlo kasav de'ekne psulim. But if the guy did not encumber future purchases in this debt, so then you can't post-date a shtar, because by post-dating it, you could be creating a problem like we just mentioned. Okay? Ela imkain mefurish v'kasav bo di'icharnuhu. Unless you write that this is a post-dated shtar. In other words, the date when we write the shtar is well after the date of the loan. Okay, you have to write that. The tam hadavar, and the reason is, and he's going to speak this out, the chashinin shalova ben Nisan, the kana halova karka be'ir. We're worried that the guy borrowed money in the month of Nisan, and then he purchased a property in ER, the Icharo, the Kasbuzman Halma, Misivan. And then they post-dated a shtar and they wrote the date in the shtar in Sivan. Okay. And then the borrower sold the property that he bought in ER that was never encumbered by the loan that was made in Nisan. It turns out that the creditor is seizing assets from a buyer that he had no right to seize from. He says, if in the shtar they would have recorded the date of the loan, that it was done in Nisan, then it would be clear from the paper itself that he has no right to seize assets that were purchased after the date of the loan in ER. And then it would not be permitted for the lender to seize assets from the purchaser. We'll hold it here. We'll continue in Mirz Hashem.